Welcome back everyone to the Student Lit Fest 2024, organized by Free Space, a project of Yuvaka Sangha, supported by Chanakya University and Sapna Book House, media partners Deccan Herald and Prajavani. As we ride the waves of inspiration from our inauguration, let's dive right into thought-provoking panel that promises to redefine our literary journey. The theme of this panel is New India, New Stories, a journey where the past meets the future and tradition intertwines with innovation. Today, we are privileged to have with us two distinguished guests who have mastered the art of storytelling from different perspectives. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Vamshi Juluri, a professor of media studies at the University of San Francisco. Sir is an avid writer, cultural critic, and novelist, a frequent contributor to the Huffington Post and the Indian Express. He has published several papers and essays on Hinduism, history, and Bollywood, and also made significant contributions to the field of media studies. His efforts to preserve the historical identity of India in textbooks are commendable and have led to positive change in the education system. Sir, we are really glad to have you with us today. And then we have Professor S. Giridhar, author and Chief Operating Officer of Azim Premji University. Sir has been regularly writing for various publications on issues of public education and social development. His book, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Teachers, The Heroes of Real India, was a tribute to heroic government school teachers, for which he interacted with over 250 teachers in about 110 schools. Sir has also co-authored two acclaimed books on cricket in which he is interested in, and has several publications in English and Esperanto. Sir brings a unique perspective and introspection of academics and storytelling. Sir, we are really happy to have you with us today. Welcome to the session, sir. Now, I would like to hand over the stage to the moderator of the session, Shri Pradyumna AK, an adept writer himself and the convener of Student Lit Fest 2024. And audience, now Shri Pradyumna will guide the conversation.
A very good morning to one and all present here. This panel, this introductory panel to our Lit Fest is called New India and New Stories. So this topic, I mean, if you see those four words, you can understand how open-ended it sounds, and so many questions those four words itself bring about. New India, then what is old India? So new stories, what is the old stories? So why do we need new stories? Is it coming at the expense of the old stories? So it's a thought-provoking statement in itself. So to start off this conversation, sir, so my view of story and storytelling as a writer, I'll tell you one incident where I was very upset with something I had written. It was a screenplay or something, and then I wasn't happy with it. So I said, this is such a bad story. I've written a bad story. So my mentor told me one thing that's gone etched deep in my mind. What he said was, listen, AK, he calls me AK. So he said, listen, AK, there is no such thing as a good story or a bad story. But he said, however, there is good storytelling and bad storytelling. And that makes all the difference. So that statement stayed with me. And in the context of that, I want to open up, and I want to invite each of you to provide a brief statement about your perspective on New India and New Stories.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much, AK, and to Yuvaka Sangha for this opportunity to talk to you and share some thoughts along with Professor Jaluri, Vamshi. I like the fact that this is slightly open, because as I told AK, honestly, then we can say whatever we want, irrespective of what the question is. New India, new stories. Somewhere along the way, I'll interpret it the way I want to interpret it, and I'm sure Vamsi here will take it on in a much better way. To me, New India must mean something positive, something uplifting, something aspirational, and something very different from earlier. in the inaugural session itself, there has been some reference to how that should be. And I personally tried to bring that into my own writing. So when I look for experiences in my travels across the country, which I'm extremely fortunate that my work with Azim Premji Foundation takes me to different parts of India. Somehow from day one, I have been fortunate enough to look at things with that perspective of what is positive, what is good, what is optimism, what is resilience, what is uplifting. So very often it is tempting to look at a glass and say it's half empty. I'm saying New India, New Stories must be an approach to see why it's half full. Because I think half full is where you get the aspiration to see whether tomorrow it can be another millimeter higher, another nanometer higher if necessary. Because this is a long journey. But on that journey, we must keep seeing what should be positive. So there was a reference to my book on government school teachers. And you might say, that book has 50 teachers featured out of the number of teachers I met across in 5 districts. And I chose only those who were the heroic people. It doesn't mean they were the only ones. There are thousands and thousands. I had the fortune to meet some of them, and I could convert them into this. To me, that for me was a small and very humble contribution towards New India, New Stories. But let me take cricket as well. Writing about cricket, and this transcends geography, because you write about cricket, then you admire cricketers, whether they are Australians or Englishmen or Pakistanis or New Zealanders. You look at what you like about them. And therefore, if you are writing all about technique of cricket and stuff like that, and analyzing stats, etc., there should be some place where you admire the sport for what it means. Because when you play cricket or when you play sport, there is a certain development and a growth that comes through with that game, for a nation, for a society, for an individual. So what does nobility mean? What does courage mean? What does large-heartedness mean? What does innovation mean? What does courage mean? So a variety of things can be converted into it. All I'm saying is New India, New Stories means I want to look at things in a manner that can be told to people in an aspirational way and in a way that makes people happy. We have enough problems and enough downers every day. It will be good, and I think a service if one can, in one's own humble way, write New India, New Stories.
Thank you, Professor Giridhar. Thank you. When I saw the phrase New India, New Stories, my social scientist mind first said, what comes first? Is it a new India as in a political entity or a political direction which is generating all these new stories? Or is it the other way around? As somebody inclined towards writing and the arts, is it that there are these amazing new stories coming out of people's lives in India, whether it's government school teachers, great body of work right there, whether it is students, whether it's elders, whether it's people whose stories have not really been told. Are they driving, is it their story that is making this new India happen, of a certain kind of political change or political trajectory? So I take the social scientist professor concession and say, well, it's cyclical, they're both interrelated. But I want to give you a more concrete and less abstract set of examples. So many of the things you just said, Professor Giridhar, were occurred from the minds and words of youth I was interviewing in the 1990s. Okay? I was doing my PhD dissertation then. Those of 90s was probably at least half a generation before your generation. So students who were in college and high school at that time were witnessing a very quick change in India in the 90s. So in a sense, it felt like a new India in the 1990s because of economic liberalization. And the way India changed almost overnight from the 80s to the 90s was huge. That's when all the global brands started coming in, then global television, MTV, Star TV, all these things. And then, of course, later, after that, the cell phone and internet wave came. So there have been 2-3 decades of very rapid transformation in India, technologically, socially, economically, and of course, culturally. So in the 90s too, when I was interviewing people and trying to create an argument, I had this glass half full, half empty dilemma. On the one hand, they were my professors in America, very smart people, all trained in the best Marxist critical cultural traditions, who were looking at the glass as empty or full. What do you think? Empty. They're pessimists. They've studied Karl Marx, who didn't have time to shave his beard, right? So they're very pessimistic. And in some ways, that pessimism was infectious. The years I was coming to India in the 90s, I would say, yes, the economic growth is happening, but so is inequality. So is environmental destruction. Is capitalism really going to solve India's problems or the world's problems? So I was pessimistic. But then, who seemed optimistic to me? The people I was interviewing. The people who were watching Star TV and, aspirational, they were very positive and optimistic about where their lives were going to go. And my book ended up being 50-50 in a sense, critical in some ways, but also respecting the optimism of the India stories of the 90s. Now, I'll fast forward and give you just the last 10 years with some examples. I felt the sense of optimism about a new India and new stories around 2014, for sure. That's when my book, Rearming Hinduism, came out. And I had some wonderful conversations right here in Bangalore. And what inspired Rearming Hinduism, apart from some of the striking images like Hampi Narasimhaswamy and the issue of how Hinduism was being misrepresented in American textbooks, was a pop culture phenomenon, led at that time mostly by Amish. How many of you have read Amish's books? I'm curious. Okay. And Sai Swarupa's books. You have to read Sai Swarupa's book on the goddesses. It is brilliant. So a whole bunch of us, I think, it's presumptuous to say Renaissance, but we were trying to write about the gods and goddesses, but in a new way. So I brought my book from the time along as a little plug. This is Hanuman, part 1, the Kishkinda Chronicles. So this was a series of novels I wanted to write. I really enjoyed writing this novel more than anything else. But then, unfortunately, speaking about stories and storytelling, I was overambitious. I said, I'll write a trilogy, and then I got interrupted. It took me 5 years to write book 2, and eventually I'll write book 3, I hope. But anyway, so early 2000s, I want to give you one example. This was a big thing that was happening in Indian popular literature at that time, right? Amish's books, retelling the stories of the gods or mythology, trying to express contemporary concerns through some kind of fictional setting. In my case, it was supposed to be the prehistoric time, pre-human times even. Then Kishkinda was full of this very culturally sophisticated and wonderful, marvelous species called the Kishkindans. So it's not the Ramayana story, but sort of my own story, respectful, but hopefully you'll enjoy reading it. Now I'll fast forward, and then I'll pause so we can continue with our conversation. What has happened to the stories coming out of India, say, from 2014 to now, 2024? I went through a phase when I started feeling pessimistic again, largely because of the very determined propaganda campaign being waged, particularly in the West. So that was something that had made me feel somewhat disappointed. But I have to say, every time I saw or read a story from India, in some strange way, it gave me hope again. So I want to mention 2 movies that I watched in the last 1 year, and maybe we can talk more when we come back to it. One is Kantara, and that was, I watched it in November 2022, and the profundity of that movie. I mean, it was very popular. Most of the movie was what I guess is called mass entertainment. It's fights and, songs, all the fun. But the theme of intergenerational continuity, the theme of inheritance, cultural inheritance, that movie said, bleep you in a way to all the propaganda that Macaulay and, the modernity had put on us. Here is this little boy who grows up, he's having fun, and then he realizes he's with the gods. His father's gone back to God, and he has to sing and dance for the gods. That's the way it is. And the most profound line there, which rejects all the propaganda, all the limitations of our time, when in the initial flashback, Tirmanam nan martini, what is a court? What is a constitution? What is Macaulay? What is all this stuff? The gods decide. And that is the greatest intergenerational bond we have, whether it is Hanuman or, I forget the name of the gods, Varaharupam. And the last movie I want to mention, it's not as famous as Kantara, but it came out a few months ago. It's a Telugu movie called Balagam. It is also about ancestors and nature and all these things. So these are just some data points I thought I would throw out. If you look at the last 10 years of storytelling in India, where is it going? Is the glass half full or empty? Or, just some questions for us to think about. I'll pause with that.
Thank you. So from what you both said, this defining New India, new stories, I mean, there is absolutely no way we can treat that title, take it in a literal way. And so I feel that what both you said, they have to converge into one point for it to work, in that sense, like where this approach of, okay, I'm going to define exactly what it is as necessary as having this abstract positive view to view this in a hopeful way. That when we say new India, so anything new is always supposed to be exciting. So I guess both those points can converge at a point. And since you mentioned continuity, what I thought of when you were saying that was why it is really difficult to define or try to define this is because of how Indians as a culture view time. It is so difficult for us to say what new India is because culturally our sense of time is very, being one of the most ancient civilizations in the world, we can go back way more than other cultures or other centers across the world. So because of that huge, I don't want to say backlog, but that wealth of knowledge that is accumulated, so then we also have this view of new India. Yeah, there's going to be a new India every 10 years from what you said. So continuing, so I want to ask both of you, so how do you see the intellectual heritage of this land influencing the narratives of the present and future? Because our intellectual heritage and past have influenced, or influence has been curtailed maybe in the past. So we're not going to go into that. How does the intellectual heritage of this land influence the narratives of the present and the future?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. So on the one hand, newness is going to happen every 10 years or every few years. So in a way, it's also about recognizing generational experience. So at this moment, there is a generational constellation, right? There are probably 3 generations in this room. This is a term that the American psychologist Jean Twenge, whose work on generations I'm finding very useful, talks about. So think about it. If somebody is from what is called Gen X, right? Somebody born in the 60s or 70s, who grew up in the 80s, like me, we had a childhood when we didn't have television. I remember the day, we got our first black and white television set in Hyderabad in 1978. Okay. Now, if I think of my parents' generation, they were born in the 1920s when India was a British colony. So, so many new things happened much after they were born. Now, I'm guessing most of you had cell phones or you knew what a cell phone was by the time you were born, right? So, whether you're Gen Z, now millenniums and satellite TV. So, what I'm trying to say is that at any given time, society consists of people from different generations, which means who've gone through life stages at different moments. And we are all sort of, trying to pass on these stories towards each other. Now, if you look at that in the context of India, for thousands of years, this sort of intergenerational flow was for the most part not interrupted. Even under British colonialism, even though there was this Macaulay education and all that, for the most part, people continued doing what their elders did. However, in the last 2-3 decades, there have been challenges to it. And I want to talk a little more about what is happening in the West, because there I feel this intergenerational continuity, which was not great to begin with, because they already had very big ruptures with their, monotheistic past, that is their ancient pagan past. The last 2-3 decades, the break between, say, the Gen Z and millennials and the Gen X and boomers has been very deep. And this is not to blame anybody, but a lot of people blame the boomers for being the first selfish generation in history in which stopped caring about the next generation and spending their savings on parties and travel instead of their children and grandchildren. But for many reasons that there has been a break. Now, I think in India, what is going on, I just wrote an article recently in the American Mind called Civilizations and Generations. And in that, I kind of mapped out, in China, there's a very big youth population, okay? But they're pessimistic. They're calling themselves the last generation. So they're refusing to have children, mainly for economic reasons, but also because they're pessimistic culturally. They don't have a story or a reason. In America's Gen Z and millennials are also having that kind of pessimism. They have a lot of revolutionary optimism. They want to free Palestine and free Gaza and maybe free Berkeley and New York. They want the whole world to be a free Gaza. American kids, okay? So now they have that revolutionary optimism. It comes out of a desire to change the world and bring about social justice, all that is good. But how naive they're becoming more and more. Because the data point I want to mention, October 7th, when the Hamas attacks on Israel took place, a few days after that, Harvard University did a public opinion poll. And they found that about 50% of 18 to 24 and 24 to 35-year-olds, that age group, that is Gen Z and millennials, about 50% of them said, this massacre, horrible terrorist atrocities on civilians, babies, mothers, wives, so many hostages there. They said it was justified. The next question asked, do you know what all the Hamas people did? Very, very horrible things. They said yes, but it is still justified. Now, 20 years ago when 9/11 attacks happened, most people said it was bad. People also said, yes, what did America do? What are the mistakes America made? Why did it support this Bin Laden and these Mujahideen and Taliban, etc.? They asked the questions. They also criticized Bush going to war in Iraq. But nobody said, outlandish, outrageous violence is justified because, quote unquote, one fellow has a perfect oppressor identity and one fellow has perfect oppressed victim identity. So this is the state of whatever our intellectual heritage is confronting today, very, very powerfully propagandized dogma or belief about good guys and bad guys. It is almost like 2,000 years ago when people very literally believed in Satan and all these apocalyptic themes. So not to ramble on too much, but what I want us to just think about is, yes, there is a lot of interest right now in Indian intellectual heritage. I recently read a book after Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations. I read Foreign Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar's book called The India Way. It's a very fascinating book because he has a chapter called Lessons from Krishna or something like that. And he's talking about how Arjuna was reluctant to fight, and how, many times India is also like that. We are very reluctant to fight, but sometimes there has to be a Krishna who tells us how to fight, where to fight, that it is our duty. For me, as a media professor, I think we, and many of you are media students and it's a literature professor, so we have a duty to fight falsehood. We have a duty to fight forces, organized forces, which are breaking intergenerational continuity, demonizing our intellectual heritage, making us forget it. Anyway, so wonderful stories in Dr. Jaishankar's book also, in Shishupala. He says India has this Shishupala policy, where we forgive 100 times, but the 100th time you have to act. So anyway, so I can see many ways in which our intellectual heritage is informing the present, but I think what we must work towards is a more comprehensive intellectual framework. And for that, this kind of intergenerational continuity, dialogue, and empathy is very, very important. So I hope that was useful in some way.
When you have two people discussing a subject, the interesting thing is very often they can be orthogonal, hopefully not 180. But I want to add a dimension to what he said, and again wrap it in terms of what it means to us here. I'd like to talk of a couple of things. One is confidence, and one is being comfortable in one's own skin. So if I look back, I think a writer who was completely confident in his skin, and therefore his stories are as relevant and enjoyable today as they were probably 90 years ago, is a person like R.K. Narayan. So R.K. Narayan writes for me when I was a child. I'm 1956 born. He said he's 1969 born. So if he talked of TV, I should talk of the radio with the aerial that used to be hung across the hall in order to catch something. So just to tell you, so therefore R.K. Narayan is memories of as a child in the 60s, reading R.K. Narayan. But I'm very sure that if I pick up R.K. Narayan's book today, or I give it to my daughter, he or she would enjoy it as much as then. What is the secret of that? The secret of that is the secret is simply R.K. Narayan's complete comfort in being in his white dhoti and shirt and sitting at his table and writing a story around Malgudi. Whether Malgudi is a combination of Malleshwaram plus Bazangudi, or whether it is a combination, some mythic, nice conversion of Mysore with lollies and stuff like that, I do not know. But that, according to me, is the way one approaches. So I think confidence and being comfortable in one's skin will ensure relevance and salience of what we write about ourselves, our society, our country. In other words, no story is transient or fleeting. The root of it is that extreme comfort in my soil and the extreme comfort I have in writing about my soil. You can expand it to different areas. He talked of politics, he talked of economics, I talk of sports, but in each of these you can find that if you have the mantra of confidence, comfort in your own skin, and talking about my own soil, this will happen automatically. So that is point number one. Point number two is also a generational thing. Both of us grew up, and at that time, the nuclear family was not that common. And therefore, many children who were born in the 50s, 60s, and 70s also had the opportunity of living with grandparents. And we have the hugely wonderful tradition of stories being passed on through grandmothers and grandfathers. People think it's grandmothers who tell stories, but I think that's slightly biased. I think grandfathers also had time, and they could tell good stories if they were storytellers. The intermediary generation, which as we went nuclear, lost out a bit on that, I think. So people were migrating. So while the grandparents remained in a small town or in the place where the people grew up, the children went and sought employment elsewhere, and thereby the nuclear family. And therefore you'll find a significant increase of nuclear family. Two people, in those days, just the parent, one parent working, usually the father. And then as it grew on, both parents working. Where is the time for storytelling? Where is the energy to tell stories? Where is the time to bring stuff to them? To me, therefore, that intermediary 30 years generation was slightly that rootless thing that I call it. Therefore, they had Ringa Ringa Rosies and Up the Hill. What is that poem? What is that? Something went up. Jack and so all that. And you look around in your apartments, 5-year-old children, even now, it's infra dig to talk in Kannada or Tamil or Telugu. they'll all say, what ya kamda, and do the English thing, and the parents also talking to them in English. Now, all this is the antithesis of that comfort in my own skin, etc. So comfort in your own skin is something very important, and that must be in our grip all the time. I think the next generation after that generation is very lucky. So even though we still are very nuclear family, both parents working busy, I think technology will help us, because now you have access to a variety of stuff. All I need is to trigger you to say, hey, Ponniyin Selvan has come, and immediately people start thinking, Chola dynasty, 1,000 years ago, how did they build big temple? How did they have that big dome come there? What kind of engineering? And travel has also increased. So children are being taken by parents for a variety of places. So suddenly the guy goes to Hampi, for example, or the guy goes to Lepakshi closer by, and he wonders, how are these two stones and series of stones so beautifully made into a fortress wall? Where is the cement in it? How do they stick it together? What is the engineering behind it? And therefore, there comes wonderment, there comes root, there comes confidence, and there comes comfort, and there comes a connection with history. So I think it's a variety of things. I have probably mixed, not conflicted, but mixed a few things. But I'm trying to also imagine myself. Am I writing differently now at the age of 67 than what I attempted to write as a young college student of 22? Certainly. Because that's maturity. Some people are lucky enough to write at that age itself like that, but I had to go through that growing up period. For me, the rooted Giridhar writing of 67 is unrecognizable from the rootless writing of a callow Giridhar of 1978.
Thank you, sir. So, I totally agree with what you both said. I have one question, and then we'll move to the audience if they have any questions. We are running a little short on time. What you said, I just remembered something. So when I was in school, it's a very small, subtle thing about how this generational continuity is under attack, or you can't even say under attack, because it's happening, sad to say, in an organic way. An example is in my school. So this is what, second standard, third standard student when I was. So there used to be a few friends who come to school, and their parents would have done nice morning puja in their houses, everything, and then one nice kumkum big on the forehead here, and then they come to school, and then nobody asked them to do it. It wasn't like their peers teach them, saying, hey, but somehow this happened automatically. And when I was a child, I did not find that weird. That was very normal to me. That is what scares me more even now that I see that something as subtle as that, all of that is one small example, all of that builds up to this gap that we are facing. So my last question for your closing remarks was that so how can literature and storytelling bridge this generational gap? How can we get a shared understanding of the complex heritage, where the old generations and you said 3 generations are here. So how can we bridge this gap as storytellers, where all 3 generations are, forgive the pun, on the same page?
Well, you said page. I'll just tell a story, small story. I really would love to know what your school teachers say about this, because teachers are so well equipped to monitor, generational change. Parents are too. But then parents are so busy, keeping up with the neighbors and keeping up with office pressures and so on. But I think teachers observe a lot. What is it that stays on the page? I mean, what you said, about R.K. Narayan is amazing. These things keep coming back, whether it's an old movie or an old story, somehow it seems to resonate. Maybe what is needed, particularly in terms of conversations in platforms like this or in colleges and schools, is a more conscious cultivation of generational representations, reading skills and recognizing generational representations in media texts. Sorry, that sounded too academic. I'll make it simple. This is the example that comes to mind. Recently, I picked up a book in a library called The Global Activist Handbook. Okay, just for fun. I go to a bookshop or a library, I have to bring something home. And usually it's a bookshop, which means I'm getting poorer by the day. So sometimes library, at least I'm not getting poorer. There is, I'm taking it back in a few days. And American libraries are very well stocked, well organized. I'm sure this book is there in every library, in every county across the United States. And it's there right on front display. A lot of young people, 15 to 18-year-old kids, after high school, hanging out in our library, reading this. So I saw this book. It's by DK Publishers, who make very attractive books with a lot of pictures. It's called The Global Activist Handbook or something. I pick it up, and it has a picture of Malala. It has a picture of, a whole lot of youth icons, Greta, how dare you pollute the world. It has pictures of San Francisco Pride, all these things. And many of these are, understandable, commendable ideals. We want climate change justice, we want to stop pollution, we want equality, and, wonderful ideals. But what I noticed, because this is how I'm sort of trained as a media student, is, the ways feminist media studies trains you to see how men and women are, say, depicted in a movie or in a book. I just started noticing that this entire book of about 40, 50 pages, there were no elderly people. There's like about 50 pages, there's maybe about 200-300 photographs in the book. Every photograph, the person is, say, between 14 to 30. And maybe there was one token reference to taking care of the elderly, and there's a photo of a young person wheeling an elderly person on a wheelchair. Okay? So it's an object. The one elderly person in that book is objectified, just sitting on a wheelchair while a young person is pushing the wheelchair. So I said, what kind of changing the world is this if there is this kind of chronological narcissism that is being inculcated through our schools, through our colleges, through our pop culture, through our NGOs? Well-meaning, many of it is well-meaning, I understand that. But unless, all of us actively start saying, we need to tell stories where we are recognizing that there is diversity in this room, and it's not just skin color or religion or costume. It is diversity in terms of lived experience. And the only way to start unpacking it is again through empathy, because when you're 20, it's very hard for you to imagine what it's like when you're 50 or 60, because physically, physiologically, it's different. Okay? Similarly, if you're 50 or 60, don't assume that somebody who is 20 now has the same life as you did 30, 40 years ago. There are different pressures. I mean, the air children are breathing today is more damaged, tragically. Every day there's noise pollution. India's 10% economic growth means every day some building is being brought down, some destruction, you can't walk on this. So all these challenges are there, I recognize it. So be empathetic. Elder people should be empathetic to the young and vice versa. And that is important because our culture, especially in the modern curriculum, is not representing that, it's not reflecting that. Everybody thinks diversity just means everybody is between 15 to 30 and everyone who came before, is evil. A friend of mine, a little boy once told me, man, this global warming is such a problem, climate change. I can't believe our ancestors messed it up for us. So I always think, when I hear the word ancestors, I think of some rishi, living in the forest, not even harming a worm. But to this American kid, ancestors caused global warming, So, so in this way, I can see people's sense of the past being skewed. So I hope that, more and more will practice seeing things in time. And I think we are very well equipped because, as you said, Indian culture is still equipped to see time as a natural phenomenon. Like all our festivals, Sankranti is coming soon, Ugadi will come. So we need to respect that, understand and be in tune with natural time and celebrate our stories which reflect that.
I actually wanted to speak a lot more, but we are a little short on time. And this topic, though, I think we can go on till evening if you want. So we'll just open, I'm going to take 2 questions from the audience.
Good morning, Omshi sir. Kumar Banu here. I'm your regular follower of Twitter. And my question is, whatever you explained, exactly 100% true. Present youths are not aware about basically ancestor what have they given contribution to every industry, whatever. So how do we convert present youth to focus, imbibe the qualities of what ancestor had learned from their ancestor, and how to inform the present youth to more know about environment issue in a such a way where ancestor has taught in kids only how to put a tree in that way, giving example of whatever Pauranika, yeah, Pauranika, all that. So present youth need to understand what Bhavya Bharata culture and what our ancestor contributed. In that way this global warming issue can be explained in such a way they can understand rather cursing ancestor and all. So in what way we can do to make understand present youth?
I'm going to answer your question in a different way.
Yes, please.
I'm just saying that sometimes we become too serious.
Yes.
Okay? We become so serious that we forget that we have a life to live. Okay? The work we may do can be serious, but we should not take ourselves seriously. So I'm going to say something else completely different, but in a way answering. I wish we had more humor. I wish we could laugh more. And therefore, when we read, can we be less pretentious? So when I interview people for some positions in our various functions, nobody will ever tell me that I read Jeffrey Archer or that I read Woodhouse. They'll pick nice, thick Marquez or others because they want me to listen to what they think I want to listen. I'm still waiting for the candidate who will tell me I love my Jeffrey Archer and I love my Woodhouse. Because if he says Woodhouse, I'll walk across the table, embrace him and share a few P. Smith jokes. P. Silent. Thank you.
Good morning or good afternoon to respected dignitaries. This is not just a question, I think I'd also like to make a mention because there was a talk on the panel regarding people of my generation or around the same age not giving enough respect. And I think the lack of this respect is fundamentally, I think, the lack of empathy. Because I see us, or people of our generation, not giving enough respect to elders because I feel like a lot of times we hold them responsible for people of their age group or what they've done, not necessarily them. And I also think the problem comes that those elders are representing themselves and the people from the past. So to them it is, we are all representations of our forefathers, hence we would want this to be continued, but we are more people who of this generation are objective. We say things like we are holding only you responsible or only this generation responsible, certain society is responsible. One more question. How would any of you advise that we are able to show each other empathy, coming in a way of putting aside our differences? Because one great example would be a lot of people from my age group, the memories that we have of our grandparents is much less happy memories of like stories or like going to our native and experiences. Rather, we have stories of like squeezing in our vacations just to meet them, and the things sometimes we have to hear comes from them with love, but sort of in a way that we aren't used to hearing. Like, oh, you wear clothes like this, or oh, you don't remember us anymore, oh, you don't like dress or talk the way we do. So, and to us, suddenly it feels like they aren't understanding us, we aren't understanding them. Both of us are singling each other out as responsible instead of coming from understanding where each of us are coming from. So, how do we empathize?
I'll try a quick response with just two parts because we're running out of time. The first part is academic and scholarly. The second one, following Professor Giridhar's inspiration, is going to be light-hearted but also profound. Okay. First part is, what we need is an understanding of our systems of learning in comparison to the Western system of learning. We need an understanding of the West, not just learning our traditions and Indian knowledge systems and so on, which is what a lot of people are doing. There's a very important body of work led by Professor S.N. Bal Gangadhara, and his students, including Professor Chaitra and others. A very good book I would urge everyone interested to read is called As Others See Us. It is a conversational format, explanation of his famous books like The Heathen in His Blindness. So in As Others See Us, Professor Balgandhara draws our attention to the fact that typically in India, we don't learn in the Western way. The Western way is, we learn about things, there is a theory, there is a model. And now, many of us have become like that, not just your generation, my generation too. We'll always ask, why do we do this? Why do we have to put bottu? Why do we have to light a lamp? Why do we have to take off shoes? Now, typically in India, nobody did that. One generation after another, you imitated your elders. Now, the challenge for us is we have 2-3 generations which want to do the right thing. I think innately we recognize generational continuity, tradition, respect for elders, protection for young is important. That is our dharma. But how to do it, we don't know, because we are imitating our elders. And our elders, like you said, are sandwiched. They're already lost. They're representatives of thousands of years of cultural evolution. But we are not equipped. In 2-3 generations, a lot has been forgotten. Whatever little is left revolves around our gods. That much I'm glad. We still feel reverence for our gods. I wish we could exercise that reverence more for our nature gods, by respecting trees, not cutting them down, respecting, nature, all that. So that is S.N. Balgangadhara's reference is the academic one. Now the light-hearted one is a very Bangalore movie, One Cut, Two Cut. How many of you have seen this? It's a very whimsical, independent kind of movie, I guess. I think it was made by a friend of a friend. And our esteemed guest in the morning was also in it. So One Cut, Two Cut is a wacky movie. It's a comedy. Okay, watch it, but there is something profound in it because there is a little song they sing called One Cut, Two Cut, Flower is Came, 3 Cut, 4 Cut, What is Became. Now it seems very silly and trivial, but you know what? 1 year ago, when my family was confronting a very big crisis with my mother being diagnosed and everything, we were just singing that song, What is Became. So it is a mystery. Ultimately, what I'm trying to say is our existence is a mystery. Our time in this world is a mystery. And by recognizing the sources of the culture which are, presuming to remove the mystery and wonder and joy of life, and trying to make us believe we have only one life and all we have to care about is this one body and there is nothing else. We have to recognize that as a source of propaganda, and for that, again, Bal Gangadhar's work is very important. But the important thing is feeling life, as you said, and for that, joy is wonderful. So enjoy One Cut, Two Cut.
Thank you, sir. I like this. This was a very seemingly casual discussion or a conversation that we had, but a lot was said, and I'm sure the audience picked up all of it. So, as I really agree with what both of you said, and as a writer, I myself am going to start viewing things slightly differently after this panel discussion. So, as far as new India and new stories are concerned, so removing all the big words and taking it very simply, I can say that for a new India and for new stories, that the kind that we want, I guess the trick would be to be kind to your elders and to the younger people. You don't know what challenges the other one faced. And then I guess be comfortable in your own skin. And I guess this new India, new stories is going to automatically happen once these two parameters are filled. Thanks a lot, panelists. Thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Thank you, panelists, for such an insightful discussion covering various topics. Particularly, sir, when you told about Amish Tripathi's writing style, that's something which took Indian literary era by a revolution. Post that, there were authors like Vineet Pachpai, Ashwin Sanghi, and Sai Swarpa ma'am, also Vamshi Krishna, who wrote Draupadi, Arappa books and all. So it was a way of telling stories which pricked the interest of many readers, and including me. So that's a field that was I got very interested in writing about and reading about. The way he told the stories, in a way the current generation will get connected with. And coming to the points that you discussed about environmental, recently I was also having the same discussion with one of my senior with whom I have discussion about current affairs and all. So when I asked about the same thing, he said environment and development can't coexist. That's what he said to me. But after listening to you, I think it's not the same case. It's different. And what sir also, Professor Giridhar said about the language being in own skin. That language thing is something in Bengaluru you face that in many degree colleges. If you go, both guys know Kannada or be it any native language, but they won't be speaking. And that's something different I found in Mumbai, because those guys really speak in Marathi no matter how much they know other languages. That's a trend different I found in Mumbai. So really thankful for discussion on various fields. Now I request Shri Priya to honor Dr. Vamshi sir. I request Kirtana to honor Professor Giridhar sir. And thank you, Pradyumna sir, for moderating the session. Thank you, panelists. Thank you all. Guys, I hope you enjoyed the New India News Stories session. Now, going back to old Bharat and old stories, I have a few questions for you. Okay, so the questions will be in Kannada. I hope you get the answer right. The first question I have for you is, ಆದಿ ಶಂಕರಾಚಾರ್ಯರು ಸ್ಥಾಪಿಸಿದ 4 ಪೀಠಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲನೆಯದ್ದು ಎಲ್ಲಿದೆ? ಇಫ್ ಯು ನೋ ದ ಆನ್ಸರ್, ರೈಸ್ ಯುವರ್ ಹ್ಯಾಂಡ್ಸ್.
ಶೃಂಗೇರಿ.
ಯಾ, ದಟ್ಸ್ ಅ ರೈಟ್ ಆನ್ಸರ್. ಆದಿಗುರು ಎಂದೇ ಪ್ರಸಿದ್ಧರಾದ ಶಂಕರಾಚಾರ್ಯರು 4 ಕಡೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಮಠಗಳನ್ನು ಸ್ಥಾಪಿಸಿದರು. ಶಾರದಾ ಪೀಠ, ಶೃಂಗೇರಿ, ಗೋವರ್ಧನ ಮಠ, ಒರಿಸ್ಸಾ, ದ್ವಾರಕಾ ಪೀಠ, ಗುಜರಾತ್ ಮತ್ತು ಜ್ಯೋತಿರ್ಮಠ, ಉತ್ತರಾಖಂಡ್. ಇದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲನೆಯದ್ದು ಶೃಂಗೇರಿಯದಲ್ಲೇ ಆಗಿದ್ದು. ಕಂಗ್ರ್ಯಾಚುಲೇಷನ್ಸ್. ಎರಡನೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, ಪಟ್ಟದಕಲ್ಲು ಮತ್ತು ಐಹೊಳೆ ದೇವಾಲಯಗಳನ್ನು ಕಟ್ಟಿಸಿದವರು ಯಾರು?
ಹೊಯ್ಸಳರು.
ತಪ್ಪಾದ ಉತ್ತರ.
ಕೃಷ್ಣದೇವರಾಯ.
ತಪ್ಪಾದ ಉತ್ತರ.
ಚಾಲುಕ್ಯರು.
ಸರಿಯಾದ ಉತ್ತರ, ಚಾಲುಕ್ಯರು. 8ನೇ ಶತಮಾನದ ಕಾಲಘಟ್ಟದಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರ್ಮಿಸಲಾಗಿರುವ ಮತ್ತು ದ್ರಾವಿಡ ಮತ್ತು ನಾಗರ ಶೈಲಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಿರ್ಮಿಸಿರುವ ಈ ದೇವಾಲಯಗಳು ಯುನೆಸ್ಕೋದ ವಿಶ್ವ ಪರಂಪರೆಯ ತಾಣಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದಾಗಿದೆ. ಚಾಲುಕ್ಯರ ಪಟ್ಟಾಭಿಷೇಕ ನಡೆದಿದ್ದರ ನೆನಪಾಗಿ ಪಟ್ಟದಕಲ್ಲು ಎಂಬ ಹೆಸರು ಇದಕ್ಕಿದೆ.